he discusses that it's important to do chesed every day of your life. As we nourish our bodies continuously, we breathe, and we function fit in the physical sense, to maintain, to be worthy, to exist, one has to every day minimally engage in chesed, do some act of kindness. He says very often people say, but I gave this charity a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Every day in and day out, you have to do chesed. Chesed doesn't mean putting money in a tzedakah box or giving money to a person. Any act of assistance to anyone else, whether it's encouragement, whether it's advice, whether it's accommodation to anyone, that's chesed. Now the question is, we'll see in a moment. He cites sources, but what's the rationale? We say that what was the impetus to create the world? The impetus is not a real good word. Impetus means he was like, he had no choice. But why did he create the world? Olam Chesed Yiboneh. God had no reason to create the world because God is perfect on the absolute level, because he wanted to create a setting so man should be a beneficiary of the ultimate, which is chesed. That's chesed. And we say every day, creation is an ongoing process. So meaning every moment that existence exists, and God wills existence, why does he will existence every moment? It's chesed, right? We say every day in the Shemona Esrei, in the Amida, Mechalkel Chaim bechesed. Every day, God continuously is Mechalkel Chaim bechesed. So chesed, so the original basis for creation is chesed. Chesed is ongoing, unceasing. But again, it goes back. You don't have to say because machadish tu according to Maaseh Bereishis, because creation is an ongoing process. But factually, chesed is ongoing. If not for the chesed of Hashem, it's continuous, the world not continue. Man is not worthy sufficiently that he should will such a world. So why does he will the world, regardless of one's worthiness? The answer is chesed. We have all kinds of people in this world. People totally unworthy. You have all segments. Every classification of human being is in this world. And they exist. So why does Hashem will they should exist? That's chesed. That's Mechalkel Chesed. So if God, the basis for the world is chesed, so we as Jews, that we have an obligation to emulate who he is. So we have to continuously engage in chesed. But I did it last week. No, it's ongoing. Chesed is expected of every Jew continuously every day to do chesed. Chalkel Chaim b'chesed. As he is Chalkel Chaim b'chesed, it's continuous process. We have to be engaged in that process continuously to do acts of chesed for the same reason. So let's see the Chavetz Chaim what he writes. So he says, we've discussed in the previous chapters how if one assumes the attribute of chesed, it's beneficial to the person that he's worthy to have longevity and also to atone for his sins. And it actually provides protection from all mishaps in life because it gives you a worthiness. Also, one is worthy. Normally, the question is, what is your relationship? Are you protected by the angels or are you protected personally by God himself? Also, as we say every day after Birchas Torah, we have the use of frucht in this world, and the principle remains intact in the world to come. Also, you merit children who are worthy of chokhmah, wisdom, and wealth. So if this is what chesed provides, all these unlimited amounts of benefits, how could a person not continuously be involved with chesed? Whatever we do, we should be beneficiaries of our behavior. So if the ultimate beneficiary is a person that's chesed because it provides and offers all these positive consequences and creates unlimited ramifications of good, why should one not? One should definitely be driven to do chesed. He says, as a result of this, his commitment to it should be azo, in intense love. And he quotes a pasuk, Ma Hashem dorish mimcha. What is God asking of us as Jews? Kim asos mishpat v'avas chesed. All he wants to do be act with integrity, justice, and to love kindness. Doesn't say do kind, love it. We say that you do chesed, your beneficiary, all your descendants are going to be beneficiaries of your chesed. For now, we quoted a pasuk in the Gemara, cites a pasuk. The chesed ve'emes yuchu parovan. Through chesed and emes and truth, the sin will be atoned. What is emes? So the Gemara says, the Talmud says, emes is what is Torah. Through chesed and emes yuchu parovan, the sin will be atoned for. So he says, just as Torah has to be continuous, a Jew has to engage in Torah continuously. Identically, to achieve the atonement, the chesed also has to be continuous. Okay? She cites Rav Chaim Vital, who is the primary student of the Arizal. She'odam tzarich l'sonein b'chol yom lemor. Oili she'holach hayom b'li Torah b'milz chason. A person has to bemoan the day. Let's say certain days a person does not study Torah or does not do chesed. It's a lost, that day is lost. Because every day God expects you to do chesed. He expects you to do Torah. So for whatever reason you're not able to do it, you should bemoan the day that it's an opportunity that was lost that can never be recouped. Can't recoup it. There's a story about the Chafetz Chaim. He was already older. In Europe, no Jew would go with a coachman who wasn't a Jew. Why? Because if he'd leave the city, because when the coachman would take his passengers into the forest, you never know what was going to happen. So most 99.9% of Gentiles in Europe were anti-Semites. And they were all suspect that if they had the opportunity, they would kill a Jew. That was the level of anti-Semitism. If you read about during the war, the partisans, Jewish partisans who fought in the war, they always were associated with Jewish partisans, not with Polish partisans. Why? Because even though the Jew was a comrade in battle with the Polish partisan, when the Polish partisan had a chance to kill his comrade in battle, the Jew, he would kill the Jew. The Jew cannot trust even the partisan, whereas in his best interest to leave the Jew alive. They couldn't control themselves. That was the degree of intense hate that the Poles had for the Jews. So therefore a Jew would travel, the coachman was always a Jew. Because a non-Jew would never be trusted with the life of a Jew. Of course, when he'd have the opportunity to be able to do away with the Jew, he'd do away with the Jew. So Chafetz Chaim had a Jewish coachman who was reserved whenever the Chafetz Chaim had to travel. They had to travel very often for certain communal responsibilities. And he traveled with his son-in-law. His son-in-law's name was Rav Zaks. He was a Yeshiva later in Yeshiva University, Rav Mendel Zaks. He was the youngest son-in-law of the Chafetz Chaim. So they were coming back from Vilna, which I'm not sure how many hours by coach, the trip, and they came back about 1 or 2 in the morning. And the Chafetz Chaim was an old man already. The first thing he did was he went, sat down, opened the Gemara, and sat and studied. Rav Mendel Zaks was a young man, relatively speaking. He could not stand on his feet. He was so exhausted and worn out, he wasn't able to even keep his eyes open. And the Chafetz Chaim says to his son-in-law, I haven't learned all day because we're involved in communal, which is a mitzvah. So I have to spend some time learning. And he sat, learned for a few hours, only then did he go to sleep. What's the understanding? If you know that something is so vital to your existence, and once you lose it, you can't recoup it. So how valuable is that particular moment? As tired as you are, you make sure to make good on that day. So he didn't study, he studied that day, regardless of how tired you are. So he said something beautiful. We read in Pirkei Avos, the world stands on three things: Torah, avodah, gemilas chasodim. Torah, the service of the sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash, and acts of love and kindness. Unfortunately, since the Churban Abayis, since the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we no longer have avodah. We have tefillah, but it's not quite equivalent of bringing sacrifices in the Beis Hamikdash. Right? The Torah tells us when you bring a sacrifice, it atones. It atones for us. So Torah, that pillar could be very strong, and we're able to do it. Gemilas chasodim, despite our situation, we're in Golus, we're in exile, you're able to do Gemilas chesed. But avodah, once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, you're not able to do it any longer. So that third pillar doesn't exist. So we have to somehow compensate for it. Now more than ever. So therefore, how do you compensate for it? So he cites a verse that Hashem says, I'm not interested in your korban, in your zevach, but I'm interested in your chesed. So a person does chesed in a special way, that is the equivalent of bringing a sacrifice. That's what it is. You know, it's interesting. There's a verse in the Torah that says, yikum. One's assets are called yikum. Now the word kum means to stand up. So Rashi cites the Medrash. Why are one's possessions called yikum? Because mamidim is odam al raglov. One has assets. You have money. You can stand proud. A person, unfortunately, is destitute, and you have to come on to others. You can't stand. You're unfortunately, you're at the mercy of others. So when could you stand independent? When you have means. That's yikum. So if one's means is the basis for your so-called your stability, when you give it away, is it easy? It's not so easy. Whenever you give away something which is essential to your being, not easy. So giving away something is really a sacrifice. That I study, I gain knowledge, whatever it is. But when I'm giving away something, I have less. But the Torah tells no, when you give away, if you understand what it's about, you have more. Because God says, if you do charity, God says, I will compensate you. In the material, I will compensate you. So therefore, but initially, you have to believe that. It's all based on your emunah. You have to believe that. The Gemara tells us that there's an expression they would say in Yerushalayim, the more you salt, the less you have. The less you salt, the more you have. What does it mean? When you salt away your money, always for that rainy day, that person has less. When you give it away to give charity, to do chesed, you salt less, you have more. That's aser ta'aser. By giving meiser, by tithing your money, giving it away for charity, that brings wealth, that brings bracha to you. But it's not so simple. So if that's the case, everybody should be giving away their money. The answer is, it's not simple, because what gives a person his sense of confidence and stability? I don't need anyone. I'm independent. But you understand, if a person understands that his stability is based on whether God wills you should be or not be, so when you give it away, you're just as stable. You're just as confident, even more confident. So therefore, even though the pillar of avodah, which is sacrifice, doesn't exist any longer, Hashem says, give me your chesed, I don't want your zevach. To bring a sacrifice, it's easy. You bring that for yourself. When you do something for someone else, you have to be able to understand doing for him is doing for yourself. That's not so simple. Once told over a story. In Europe, there was a network of yeshivas. It was called Navardik. Navardik, the one who founded this yeshiva, he was the head of the yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva. His name was Rabbi Yosef Horowitz. Rabbi Yosef Yozel Horowitz. Famous person. And he owned a network of hardware stores in Europe. Many towns in Russia, he had hardware stores, like a Sears Roebuck. Was a very wealthy man. One day he meets Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and two Jews, they meet. What do you ask? What is one? You say to the other, are you making a living? Right? In Yiddish, they would say, are you making macht a leben? Beth, I don't know who you grew up if they spoke Yiddish in your home. Beth, macht a leben? So he would say, you say, Baruch Hashem, I'm making a living. So Rabbi Yisrael Slanta said to Rabbi Horowitz, he says, you're preparing, you provide for your physical life. What about for the afterlife? Have you provided? I mean, here you this. Of course, he studied. He was a great Talmud Chacham, great, even more than a Talmud Chacham. But his main time was occupied in running this network of hardware stores in Europe. He had about 60 stores throughout Russia. What did he do? The moment Rabbi Yisrael said those words, are you preparing for the afterlife? He sold off all the stores and he set up a network of 60 yeshivas in Europe. The main yeshiva was in Bialystok. There was a city in Russia called Bialystok. And then he had these little satellite yeshivas. Every village had a little yeshiva. And that was those little satellite yeshiva with the feeder for the large yeshiva. It was like a preparatory yeshiva, and when they reach a certain age, they would go to the main yeshiva in Bialystok. So Rabbi Yosef, and eventually the yeshiva grew to be a very large yeshiva. They had hundreds of students, and there wasn't much money. And they needed financial support. They couldn't even afford wood for the oven in the Beis Medrash. The students' clothing were already tattered. They needed financial help. They couldn't put quality food on the table for the students to eat. So Rabbi Yosef Yozel Horowitz said, looks like he has to come to America. And once told the story. And one of his students who graduated from Nevardik, he heard he became a very wealthy man, and he lives in Manhattan. He's going to go to New York, and he'll look him up, and hopefully he'll get a sizable check, and that'll alleviate the financial plight of the yeshiva. Goes by boat, and I'm not sure what class. I mean, he didn't travel in any class that had any or provided comfort. He comes out, doesn't speak English, has no idea where this person lives. His name was Morris Schwartz. That was his name, Moshe Schwartz, and he pronounced it as Moshe Schwartz. Moshe Schwartz. That's the way he pronounced it in Yiddish. And he knows he's a wealthy man, and it was known in Harlem in those years. Harlem was a very wealthy neighborhood. All the wealthy people lived in Harlem. Okay, gets out of the boat, gets in the taxi. Many Jews spoke Yiddish. The average Jew spoke Yiddish in New York. We're talking about this at the very beginning of the 20th century. And he says he wants to go to Harlem. Now, how does he find Moshe Schwartz's address? Every house is a brownstone. So he figures he'll go from one to one. He'll see if it has a mezuzah on the door, because even Jews, they weren't observant. Everybody had a mezuzah on the front door. So go from door to door, the brownstone. He'll knock on door, and the open door says, Moshe Schwartz. Is this Moshe Schwartz's home? And they'd say no, and they slammed the door in his face. And he's going from house to house. Finally, he had a sense. Very beautiful mansion, had a mezuzah on the door, knocks the door. An Irish maid in a starch uniform answers the door. And he says, Moshe Schwartz. And she tries to slam the door in his face. He puts his foot in the door. Doesn't let her close the door. And she starts screaming, Master Morris, somebody doesn't let me close the door. And it was a duplex. All of a sudden, this person comes out of his room. He has no beard. His head is uncovered. His sideburns are cut short. And he sees his Talmud. And he says to Moshe Schwartz, this is Morris, Moshe, it's a goy. You became a goy. So Morris says, Rebbe, what are you doing here? He immediately invites him in. He sits down at the table. He lambasts him for about 2 hours. What happened to him? Well, he gave up his Judaism, this, and for what? And for 2 hours, he gave him Musar. He committed himself to be a Shomer Shabbos, to kosher, this and that. And afterwards he says, Rebbe, why did you come? You didn't come to give me musar, right? You come to chastise me, to rebuke me. Why are you here? He says, the situation in Europe has reached a point, it's intolerable. We can't survive unless we have an infusion of something substantial. He writes him a check for $25,000. It's a fortune. Goes back to Europe, and you realize Rabbi Yosef Yozel Horowitz was no fundraiser. He was Rosh Hashiva. So, but they had a professional fundraiser who knew all the protocols of fundraising. So he comes back with this 25,000 checks at a fundraiser fees. If I go next year or 2 years, no question, I'll come back minimally with that, maybe even more. He travels 2 years later. He has the address, Moshe Schwartz. This person's dressed in a very sophisticated way. He has all the verbiage. He has the language. He knows exactly what words to say, to stroke him, that he should give money. And he sits with him for 2 hours, explains to him what's going on in the yeshiva and how great he is. And Moshe Schwartz is the best thing since apple pie, mother and apple pie, everything else. At the end of the conversation, he gives him an $18 check. The Rosh Hashiva came, who doesn't know anything about fundraising, he writes him a $25,000 check. This professional fundraiser comes, $18. He asks him, where did I go wrong? He says, I'll tell you where you went wrong. So when the Rebbe came, he said to me, all your accomplishments in this world, material, it's worthless. If you became it's worthless. So if it's worthless, I could give it away. I gave the Rebbe a $25,000 check. You tell me for 2-3 hours that what I have is exceptional and it's one of a kind and it's unique. So if you tell me what I have is so unique, you think I'm giving it away so quick? I'm not giving it away. That's the reason why I wrote you an $18 check. You understand? If you believe that's what life's all about, financial success, you can't give it away so easily. It's like giving away a pound of flesh. Therefore, Hashem says, give me your chesed. I'm not interested in your sacrifice. The sacrifice is chesed. Because when you give away something, where most people believe that is my sense of security, everything revolves around your financial worth, and to somehow overcome that sacrifice. So although we only have 2 pillars, we have Torah and Gimelos Nasodim, Avod is no longer here, because the Beis Mikdash is not here. Nevertheless, if you could secure that, to be the equivalent of that we even have the 3rd pillar, even though we don't have the Beis Mikdash. The Medrash tells us that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Torah leader of his time. Yeah, he was at the time of destruction of the 2nd Beis Mikdash. He was walking with Reb Shua ben Levi, and they walk by the Temple Mount. It's desolate, and he groans and moans. He says, what are we going to do? We no longer have Beis Mikdash. So he quoted this verse. Hashem says, give me your chesed. I'm not interested in your sacrifice. Today we have something even greater. To bring a sacrifice it's almost effortless. You need atonement, you bring the animal. But to take a pound of flesh and give it away to someone else, that's not so simple. It's interesting. People, they enjoy hospitality. They enjoy host people. Why do they enjoy to host people? Because they enjoy to have people at the table. It's not because there's such bali chesed. You want to have a nice Friday night meal. You have people, interesting personalities, interesting discussion. Are you doing for them or are you doing for yourself? But of course, it's no question, it's only Shabbos. I'm not taking away. It's definitely, you're observing the Shabbos appropriately. But what about to have some people at your table where they have nowhere to go? And they don't add that special color to your table. Do you invite that kind of person to your table? We read in Pirkei Avos, Have b'nei ani and b'nei beista. Who should be the members of your household? Poor people. The people who don't have where to go, those are the people you should have at your table. They should frequent your table. Because anybody else who's a attractive person, of course you want him. But because that's for you, it's not for the person. But a poor man, where he has nothing to offer, so to say, he's not that attractive, why you have him there? You have him there for him, not for you. That's chesed. The other thing, I'm not saying it's not a nice thing to do. It's not only Shabbos. But in terms of chesed, it's a special level of chesed, because you're doing for the person, you're not doing for yourself. It was known in Europe, Friday night communities, there were many people who were very poor. They would travel from city to city raising money for themselves. They couldn't make ends meet. And they would have a committee that Friday night when they come to the city, they would provide lodging and meals for them. So in shul, at Friday night, the people were there, they had nowhere to eat. They would divide members who were committed, each one would take so many guests. And they would tell the guests, whether it was the shamas of the shul, he'd say, you go to this home, you go to this home. They make sure that these people had where to go to eat. Otherwise, they would have just been abandoned. You know what that is? You know what value it gives to these people? You go, they don't even want to look at you. And here they go, and they invite you and provide. Remember, my father, Alav Shalom, he went on a business trip in 1952 to Europe. And he was in Amsterdam for business. It was after the war. And he took a hotel room and he went to a kosher delicatessen to buy food for Shabbos, just after Shabbos. He had Shabbos himself. He was in shul there, in the Ashkenaz shul. You think you're an American, they see you're a foreigner. You don't speak Dutch. My father spoke Yiddish. They spoke Yiddish. The people did not look at him. They did not look at him. Not that my father needed them. But you have somebody come, how do you not say, who are you? What are you? Do you have a place to eat Friday night? And we're not talking people, they didn't have what to eat themselves. And my father, it made such a bad impression on him. He said, what's going on here? I mean, at least say, the Shabbos, barely that, But do you know what it means to acknowledge a person, especially when you're out of your environment, and just acknowledge the person? Invite him over for a cup of tea, not even for anything. Again, therefore, Hashem says, I don't need your zevach. To bring a korban's easy. I want your chesed. Give me your chesed, forget about the korban, the zevach. I don't need your zevach. The person with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. Now, the Chofetz Chaim writes somewhere else that when you bequeath money for tzedakah, you should bequeath it in your own lifetime. Don't allow your children to do it. Why? It isn't right. He writes this somewhere else. Because after a person passes away, even though the initial judgment is when a person passes away, goes to the world to come, and he's worthy, but things can happen later where a person's neshama is judged. A person is judged, and he needs tremendous merit at that moment. So he says, even though your children will carry out your request, they'll give the money to where it is, where it has to be given. So let's say the person needs tremendous schus. He needs the support of Torah. The Torah should be supported, or poor people should be fed. And his son is on vacation, and the charity calls him and says, I'll be back in 2 weeks. You realize your father in the world can't wait 2 weeks. He needs it every moment. He may need it at a certain moment, and if you're not there, you can't provide it. So Chofetz Chaim says, therefore, before a person dies, you set up your own charity, whether it's a kollel, whether it's a free loan, whatever it is. And therefore, it's ongoing. The chesed or the mitzvah is actually being in effect continuously. You don't have to wait for anybody because you've already given the money in advance and you've set up like an endowment fund. The money's not going to be depleted, but that money will provide continuously what the mitzvah, it'll generate mitzvahs continuously on your behalf. You give it to your children, even if they carry out your word. But you may need it at a moment where they're not available to provide that moment. Besides, he says, what happens? You give the money to your children, and the child needs the money. He needs the infusion of cash in his business. So he says, I'll owe it. I'll pay it out to the charity. Your father can't wait for you to pay it out. And what about if the wife says, I think we need a refurbishment of the house. And the wife doesn't let the husband use the money which was given to him for charity for his father. Everybody has their priorities. You want to be smart? Do it yourself. Don't leave it for your children. That's the Chofetz Chaim's good advice. Leave them an inheritance. They can do whatever they want with their inheritance. But you have to be concerned. You lived your life. You have to be concerned for yourself. You can't give it away to your kids, and you're left bereft. Well, you need it at a time which you really need it, and it's not there to provide for you. This is what it's about. So Chesed, even in one's life, not only even after you pass away, Chesed ve'emes yuchu paravam. Chesed and emes is Torah. Set up the gemach, the free load charity. Support Torah continuously. I was thinking today, we say derech eretz kodma l'Torah. The way it's understood, first be a mensch. Derech eretz, paid properly. That's a prerequisite for Torah. One sterling character is a prerequisite for Torah. So you'd say why? So the simple understanding is, we find the Torah tells us when it describes the Aron in the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, was made of gold, and it says it should be cast in gold from the inside and the outside. From the outside and the inside. Now, what was the Aron? It was the repository for what? For the luchos, for the tablets, and for the Torah. That's what it was. And the Torah says, what exactly is the profile of the Aron? It's gold on the outside and the inside. So the Gemara tells us, Kol Talmud Chacham sheitochu kibara in the Talmud Chacham. The Talmud Chacham, although he looks like holier than thou from the outside, but if he's not genuine on the inside, he's not a Talmud Chacham. He has to be thoroughly consistent with what he understands, has to be integrated into his life. Otherwise, he's not a Talmud Chacham. So what does that mean? Just as the Aron itself, why was it qualified to be a repository? Because as it was gold on the outside, it was gold on the inside. For you to be the repository for Torah, you have to be the so-called, be that outside, you have to be that inside also. Continuously consistent, not only to know, but you have to actualize it, that's your belief, that's what you feel, and that's what you do. That's the Gemara. Now, we know that every one of the Ahavas, the patriarchs, emulated Hashem, one of his attributes. Avram was Chesed. He was the pillar of loving kindness. Yitzchak was what? Was precision, was din, known as Gvura. Yaakov was Rachmin. Now, each one of the patriarchs were considered the Merkava. They were God's location in this world. Avram was God's location. Yitzchak was God's location. Yaakov was God's location. I mean, just as we have the Holy of Holies, where was the divine presence in the Holy of Holies? Before the building of the Mishkan, where was God's presence in this world? Where Avram was, where Yitzchak was, and where Yaakov were. Why? Who was Avram? Why was Avram the receptacle? And he had the capacity that the divine presence should rest with him. Because he assumed God's attribute of Chesed. That's derech eretz. Derech eretz doesn't mean thank you. And you have, you missed the etiquette or misetiquette. We're not talking about that. The derech eretz are talking about the way God says a Jew has to behave. If you emulate the way God prescribes what to emulate, which are his characteristics, he's rachum, he's chanun, he's merciful, he's gracious, he clothes the naked, he does for others. If you assume those characteristics, then you are that repository. And what's Torah? Torah is the word of Hashem. That's the Shemus Hashem, as we discussed. The Torah itself are the letters of Hashem's names, God's names, which are conjugated, that it spells the narrative. So to be the repository for that, the word of Hashem to dwell, to be retained in that location, what do you have to be? It's similar to the Aron. You have to meet the criteria. What's the criteria? That the Shekhinah dwells in your midst, as it did by Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You have to assume his attributes. Chesed. Be consistent. Rachmim. That's derech eretz kodma l'Torah. It's not you pick up the tab for the other guy to show what kind of sport you are. That's not what it's about. And you don't insult another person, which of course you shouldn't insult another person. It's speaking about chesed. And what is chesed? Chesed is ongoing. It's continuous. We speak of a person as a Baal chesed. He's a person who does chesed. Why does he do it? Because that's his essence. He doesn't do it sporadically. Whenever he has an inkling, he does it. No, it's ongoing. Rachmim, it's ongoing. You're a person needs help, or you feel a certain way, it's your reality. It's actually part of your profile as a human being. It's not external. It's you. That's who you are. So if that's who you are, then you become the repository for the Shekhinah to dwell in your midst for that reason. That's derech eretz kadmon the Torah. And the reason why Avram merited that is because he emulated God in Chesed. Yitzchak merited that because he emulated God in precision. God is perfect. And Yaakov in Rachmim. But it's interesting. We had said that it's interesting. I don't know if you realize this. Every one of the patriarchs was named by God. Yitzchak was named Yitzchak because Hashem said to Avram, when you're going to have this child, he should be called Yitzchak. Yaakov, take a look at Rashi. He was called Yaakov. Rashi cites Chazal in this week's reading. Hashem named him Yaakov. God gave him Yaakov. Avram was his name by his parents was Avraham. Avraham. Avram was by God. God added that name. Avram has no relevance to Avraham. If you remember, the letters of Hiboram, when God created them, are the same letters as Avram. Avram was a new creation. So when he was given that name, that added that hate to his name, he was no longer the same person as originally. He was a new being. Avram is the beginning of creation. Now, why did Hashem create creation? When he created Adam in the Garden of Eden. Olam Chesed Yiboneh. So because Avram himself assumed that attribute of Chesed, this is he's the beginning of a new creation. Creation started with that. He is that. He's Baram. But it was a process. Each one of the patriarchs, it began with Avram and it concluded with Yaakov. Yaakov was the most perfect of the three. You had to have each one represented each one of the three pillars. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasodim. All three together holds up the world. That gives value to existence. Once you have everything in place, now we could talk about going to Sinai. Until then, we're not there yet. So the process of creation started with Avram. It evolved as the creation was a 7-day period. It started on day one, and it concluded on Shabbos. It started with Avram Avinu. He's being Baram. That's the beginning of creation. When did it culminate? It culminated with Yaakov. That was the foundation. And the ultimate level, when it reached its full form, that was Sinai. When the Klal Yisrael received the Torah at Sinai, that's when the objective of creation was finally met. That's when it evolved in terms of addressing its purpose. That's the understanding.